The Caltharian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years and nobody dared to question their power. They were tall reptilian creatures with scales that shimmered like metal and eyes that burned with cold intelligence. Every species in the known galaxy either served them or feared them. When humanity refused to give up their colonies in the Outer Rim territories, the Caltharians found it amusing. These primitives had only discovered faster-than-light travel 200 years ago, and now they thought they could stand against an empire that had crushed civilizations far older and more advanced. Commander Jack Hayes stood on the bridge of the Earth spaceship, Defiance watching the holographic display with a feeling of dread growing in his chest. His crew had been patrolling the neutral zone when they intercepted a signal. It was broadcasting on every frequency across the entire galaxy. The Caltharians wanted everyone to see what they were about to do. Jack felt his stomach turn as the image appeared on the screen. 7 million human prisoners of war stood in massive detention fields that could be seen from orbit above the Caltharian homeworld. The prisoners were soldiers and civilians captured during the 6-month campaign when the Caltharians invaded the Centauri sector. Jack recognized some of the uniforms. He had served with men and women who wore those same patches. The Caltharian High Chancellor appeared on screen. His name was Vexthor, and he was the absolute ruler of the Empire. He wore ceremonial armor decorated with the bones of conquered species, and his voice was translated into every language in the galaxy. The message was simple and brutal. Humanity had chosen to resist. Humanity had chosen to defy the Empire. Now humanity would learn what that choice cost. Vexthor raised one clawed hand and the execution began. The energy fields dissolved the prisoners in waves of burning light. Their screams echoed across every communication channel in known space. The Caltharians made sure every species on every world heard those screams. The broadcast lasted 4 hours. Jack watched in horror as 7 million souls died one section at a time. The Caltharians showed every moment, every face, every cry for mercy that went unanswered. On Earth, in the Emergency Command Center beneath Geneva, President Helen Carter sat surrounded by military advisors and world leaders connected through secure channels. The room had gone completely silent as the massacre unfolded before their eyes. Some people wept openly. Others sat frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. General Paul Griffin, who commanded the combined military forces of Earth, slammed his fist down on the reinforced table. The surface cracked under the impact. His face was red with rage and tears ran down his cheeks. President Carter sat perfectly still. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes burned with something that frightened even her closest advisors. It was pure focused hatred unlike anything they had ever seen from her before. Lisa Morgan was a young communications officer, monitoring the Allied channels. She started reporting incoming messages as they flooded in from across human space. Every colony was demanding action. Military fleets were requesting permission to engage the enemy. Civilian populations were rioting in the streets. Their grief was transforming into fury. The riots were not about destruction. People were storming recruitment centers demanding to be allowed to fight. They were offering everything they had to support a war effort. The unified anger of billions of humans created a wave that could not be stopped or controlled. President Carter activated the emergency protocol that connected her directly to every human settlement in the galaxy. Every ship, every station, every person who called themselves human would hear her words. She stood up from her chair and faced the camera. Her voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. She told humanity what they had just witnessed. The Caltharian Empire had committed genocide against their people. They had broadcast their atrocity as entertainment, and as a warning to anyone who might resist them. The Caltharians believed this would break humanity. They believed fear would make humans surrender and accept slavery. President Carter paused and let her next words ring out across the stars. They were wrong. She declared that effective immediately the United Earth government was entering a state of total war against the Caltharian Empire. There would be no negotiations. There would be no surrender. There would be no forgiveness. Every resource humanity possessed was now directed toward one single purpose: the complete and utter destruction of the species that had murdered their brothers and sisters. Every factory would build weapons. Every shipyard would produce warships. Every citizen would contribute to the war effort. This was not a war for territory or resources. This was a war of extermination. The Caltharians had shown humanity what they were capable of. Now humanity would return the lesson. The declaration sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Most species viewed humanity as weak. They were newcomers to galactic civilization. Their technology was inferior. Their military was small and inexperienced. The idea that humans could threaten the Caltharian Empire seemed absurd. The Caltharians themselves laughed when they heard Earth's declaration. Vexthor addressed his council and dismissed the human threat entirely. These primitives would send their fleets and those fleets would be destroyed. Then the Caltharians would finish what they started and wipe humanity from existence. It would take a few years at most. The galaxy would forget humans had ever existed. But something was happening in human space that the Caltharians did not understand. Every human who watched that broadcast felt the same thing. It was not just grief or anger. It was a fundamental shift in how humanity saw itself and its place in the galaxy. Before the massacre, humans had been divided. Earth nations competed with each other. Colonies had their own interests. There were political factions and economic rivalries. All of that ended the moment those 7 million prisoners died. Every human everywhere understood that they were facing an enemy that wanted them extinct. The only choice was to fight together or die separately. The transformation happened overnight. Old enemies became allies. Competitors became partners. Every human shared one goal now: make the Caltharians pay. Jack Hayes received new orders from Earth Command. The Defiance and every other military vessel was to return to human space immediately. They were going to regroup. They were going to rearm. They were going to prepare for a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. As his ship jumped to faster than light speed, Jack looked at his crew. They were young men and women who had joined the military for adventure or education, or a dozen other peaceful reasons. Now they were something else. He could see it in their eyes. They were soldiers in a war that would not end until one side was completely destroyed. Jack thought about the 7 million dead. He thought about the Caltharians laughing as they broadcast the execution. He thought about what was coming. The galaxy was about to learn something about humanity. When you push humans too far, they do not break. They become dangerous. The transformation of human civilization happened faster than anyone thought possible. Within 3 weeks, every colony and station and settlement had converted to a war economy. Factories that made civilian products were now producing weapons and ammunition. Shipyards that built cargo vessels were now constructing warships. The change was total and absolute. Dr. Karen White ran the Advanced Weapons Research Division on Mars. She had spent 20 years developing technology for peaceful purposes. Now she stood in front of her team in the massive underground laboratory and told them everything had changed. They were not playing by the rules anymore. Every failed experiment they had ever abandoned was being brought back. Every theoretical weapon they had shelved because it was too dangerous or too unstable was now approved for development. If it could kill Caltharians, they were building it. The usual ethics committees and safety reviews were gone. The only question that mattered was whether a weapon would work. On Earth, the factories operated 24 hours a day. The Armstrong shipyards orbiting Luna had never stopped working since the declaration of war. Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper oversaw the construction of a new class of vessel. They called it the Vengeance-class Dreadnought. Each ship was larger than anything humanity had ever built. They carried enough firepower to crack a small moon. The designs pushed human engineering to its absolute limits. Ryan's team worked until they collapsed from exhaustion, then got up and worked again. Admiral Kate Sullivan came to inspect the first completed dreadnought. She asked Ryan how many ships they could produce. He told her 12 per month at current capacity. She told him that was not good enough. She needed double that number. Ryan protested that it would take 6 months to expand production. Admiral Sullivan looked at him with eyes that had not slept in days. She told him he had 3 months. The fleet was moving with or without the ships. Ryan went back to his team and they found a way. Across human space, the recruitment centers were overwhelmed. The military had been 3 million active personnel before the war. Within 6 weeks, that number grew to 50 million. Training programs were accelerated. Standards were adjusted. The goal was to turn civilians into soldiers as fast as possible. Lieutenant Chris Parker was a veteran who had survived the Centauri campaign. He had watched his entire battalion die when the Caltharians invaded. Now he found himself training recruits who looked barely old enough to enlist. He asked one young woman why she was there. She told him her brother had been in the detention camps. She watched him die on the broadcast. She was there to make the Caltharians pay. Chris heard the same story from every recruit. They had all lost someone: family, friends, lovers. The shared grief forged them into something harder than steel. Dr. Karen White's team made breakthroughs that should have taken years. They reverse-engineered captured Caltharian technology and improved it. They weaponized theories that other species had dismissed as impossible. The first success was something they called the Hellfire torpedo. It used a self-sustaining plasma reaction that burned through energy shields. The weapon violated several galactic treaties on humane warfare because it caused excessive suffering to anyone caught in its blast. Dr. Alan Hughes was the physicist who cracked the formula. He mentioned the treaties to Dr. White. She looked at him and said one word: "Good. Deploy it." The second breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A civilian scientist named Claire Bennett worked for a corporate research lab. She discovered that human neural patterns could interface with quantum computers in ways alien biology could not. This created targeting systems that processed information millions of times faster than anything the Caltharians had. Admiral Sullivan immediately ordered the technology installed in every combat vessel. The most controversial development came from the genetics labs on Europa. Dr. Marcus Lane proposed a biological weapon engineered to target Caltharian physiology. The pathogen would be harmless to every other species but lethal to Caltharians. It could potentially wipe out their entire population. 6,000 scientists signed a petition against it. They argued that using such a weapon made humanity no better than the enemy. The proposal reached President Carter's desk. She called an emergency cabinet meeting. They debated for 6 hours. General Griffin argued for deployment. The Caltharians killed 7 million humans. Their entire species was only 3 billion. The math was simple. Secretary of State Linda Brooks disagreed. If humanity used this weapon, they lost the moral authority to condemn what the Caltharians did. They became monsters. President Carter made her decision. They would develop the weapon but not deploy it. It would remain a final option. A deterrent. They would exhaust every other option first. Humanity would win this war, but they would win it as humans, not as butchers. The months passed and the first Vengeance-class dreadnoughts rolled out of the shipyards. The fleet assembled at a staging point near Proxima Centauri. Thousands of ships gathered representing every nation and colony that had once competed but now stood united. Admiral Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship. They had named it the ESS Retribution. She looked at the display showing the assembled armada. It was the largest military force humanity had ever created. She opened a channel to every ship in the fleet. Her voice carried to hundreds of thousands of sailors and soldiers. She told them they had been dismissed as primitives. The Caltharians thought they could break humanity with fear. Instead, they had united humanity in purpose. Every person in the fleet carried the memory of 7 million souls. They were not fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for justice. They were fighting for vengeance. They would not stop until every Caltharian world knew the cost of genocide. The fleet began moving toward Caltharian space. It would take weeks to reach the border. During that time, the training continued. The preparations continued. Every person knew what was coming. They were going to war against an empire that had never lost, an empire that had crushed species far more advanced than humanity. But something had changed. The Caltharians had made a mistake. They had shown humanity what they were capable of. They had broadcast their cruelty to every human in the galaxy. They thought it would create fear. Instead, it created unity. It created purpose. It created a determination that burned hotter than any star. The galaxy watched as the human fleet moved deeper into space. Some species hoped humanity would win. Others feared what humans might become. But everyone understood that something fundamental had shifted. Humanity was no longer the newcomers begging for a place at the table. They were a force that could reshape the galaxy itself. The Caltharians would learn this lesson soon enough. The Caltharian Empire controlled 200 star systems protected by fortress worlds and monitored by a vast sensor network that stretched across space. Their military doctrine had not changed in centuries. They relied on overwhelming force and superior numbers. They had the psychological advantage of being feared by every species in the galaxy. No one had successfully challenged them in over 1,000 years. They were completely unprepared for what humanity brought to the battlefield. The first engagement happened at the Helios system. It was a minor Caltharian military outpost guarding one of the approaches to their inner territories. Commander Jake Morrison led a strike force of 20 human cruisers against a defending fleet of 40 Caltharian warships. Every tactical computer in the galaxy would have predicted a human defeat. The Caltharians outnumbered them 2-1. They had heavier armor and more experienced crews. The battle should have been a massacre. It lasted 7 minutes. The human ships moved with coordination that seemed impossible. Their quantum-linked tactical systems allowed them to execute complex maneuvers as if controlled by a single mind. The Hellfire torpedoes burned through Caltharian shields like they were made of paper. The new plasma cannons melted through their hull armor. Morrison's fleet emerged with minimal damage. Every single Caltharian ship was destroyed. Not one survived. Commander Morrison ordered his crew to record everything and send it to Earth Command. Then he broadcast the recording on every frequency the Caltharians monitored. He wanted them to see what was coming. The footage spread through Caltharian space within hours. For the first time in their long history, the Empire felt something they had never experienced before. Fear. High Chancellor Vexthor watched the battle recording 3 times. He could not believe what he was seeing. How did an inferior species destroy 40 warships with such ease? Fleet Admiral Caxtor was a veteran of 100 campaigns. He studied the tactical data carefully. The human technology had improved dramatically. More concerning was their coordination. They fought as though every ship shared the same brain. Vexthor decided they needed to adapt. He ordered increased patrols and reinforced border systems. Then he made a decision that showed he still did not understand what he was facing. He sent a diplomatic message to Earth offering terms of surrender. The transmission reached President Carter 3 days later. She read it in front of her entire cabinet. The Caltharians were offering humanity 12 star systems in exchange for ending the war. 12 systems as compensation for 7 million dead. Carter crumpled the document and threw it across the room. She told her advisors that the Caltharians still did not understand. General Griffin smiled for the first time in weeks. Then they would teach them. The human offensive intensified. Small fast strike forces hit Caltharian supply lines and communication relays. Captain Nina Price commanded a group of 6 destroyers that specialized in ambush tactics. Her squadron would wait in the dark between star systems with their engines completely cold. They would watch Caltharian convoys pass by and then strike without warning. Every transport they destroyed made the Empire weaker. Captain Price told her crews they were not trying to hold territory. They were bleeding the enemy dry. This was not a war of conquest. It was death by 1,000 cuts. The Caltharians tried to counter with their own raids targeting human colonies. They expected to find soft targets with minimal defenses. They expected frightened civilians who would break under attack. Instead, they found every human settlement had been fortified during the months of preparation. Orbital defense platforms surrounded each colony. Surface-to-space batteries covered every approach vector. The civilians themselves had been trained and armed. The first Caltharian raid on New Boston Colony ended in complete disaster. The raiders expected easy victims. They encountered a population that had spent months preparing for exactly this scenario. The colonists destroyed the entire raiding fleet before military reinforcements even arrived. The surviving Caltharian officer filed a report that sent shockwaves through Empire Command. The humans had turned every colony into a fortress. Their entire civilization had become a war machine. As human forces pushed deeper into Caltharian space, they discovered something that changed the nature of the conflict. Lieutenant Greg Sanders was searching through captured databases when he found detailed records of the detention camps. The Caltharians had kept meticulous files on every prisoner, their names, their faces, their families, even their last words before execution. The information was compiled into a memorial database. It grew to encompass all 7 million victims. The database was transmitted to every human ship and every colony and every settlement. Before each battle, commanders started reading names from the list. For Samuel Curtis of New Earth. For Amanda Hughes of Mars Colony. For Patrick Lee of Titan Station. The ritual spread throughout the entire fleet. It became a constant reminder of why they fought. Every name represented a person who had been murdered. Every name demanded justice, but the success came at a cost. The Caltharians realized they were facing an existential threat. When they could not hold a system, they destroyed everything of value before retreating. They poisoned water sources. They collapsed mines. They burned cities to ash. If they could not keep their territory, they made sure humans would inherit only ruins. Admiral Sullivan confronted this reality at a place called Kessler's World. It had been a Caltharian colony, with 3 billion inhabitants. The Empire evacuated everyone days before human forces arrived. They left behind a radioactive wasteland that would be uninhabitable for centuries. Captain Peter Grant served as Sullivan's tactical officer. He pointed out that the enemy was willing to sacrifice their own worlds rather than let them fall into human hands. Admiral Sullivan made a decision that would change their entire strategy. They would stop trying to capture territory. From now on, they would bypass fortified systems and strike at core worlds. They would force the Caltharians to defend everything at once. When the enemy was stretched too thin, the human fleet would cut through to the Caltharian homeworld itself. The strategy was audacious and dangerous. It meant bypassing dozens of fortified positions. It required perfect coordination and timing. Admiral Sullivan presented the plan to President Carter during a secure communication. They would need every ship humanity had built. They would need them all attacking at the same time in one massive coordinated strike. It was all or nothing. Carter did not hesitate. She told Sullivan to do it, end this war. The preparation for the final push began immediately. The assembly of humanity's grand fleet took 3 months of constant work. Over 5,000 warships gathered at a staging point beyond Caltharian sensor range. The fleet included everything from massive dreadnoughts to nimble destroyers. It represented every colony and every nation that had once competed, but now stood united. It was the largest military force humanity had ever created. Admiral Sullivan stood in the command center of her flagship, looking at the holographic display. Her senior officers surrounded her, studying the tactical plans. She told them they were going to do something the Caltharians believed was impossible. They were going to jump directly into the Thraxis system, the Caltharian capital world. They were going to end this war in a single massive engagement. Captain Grant looked at the tactical projections with concern. The Thraxis system had over 800 defense platforms orbiting the planet. 3 fortress moons bristled with weapons. The entire Caltharian home fleet was stationed there. Human forces would be outnumbered 3 to 1. Sullivan acknowledged this but pointed out they would have the advantage of surprise and momentum. The Caltharians would be defending a fixed position. Human ships could maneuver freely. More importantly, the enemy would never expect humanity to be insane enough to attack their homeworld directly. The plan was refined through weeks of simulations. The fleet would arrive in 3 distinct waves. The first wave, commanded by Commodore Eric Stone, consisted of 600 cruisers carrying the newest experimental weapons. Their job was to create chaos and eliminate the orbital defense platforms. The second wave, under Admiral Sullivan's direct command, would be the heavy dreadnoughts and carriers. They would engage and destroy the Caltharian home fleet. The third wave would be the ground assault forces. 30,000 Marines led by General Victor Blake would secure the planetary surface and capture the Caltharian leadership. President Carter had given specific orders. If they could capture Vexthor alive, they could force a complete surrender, without fighting through every system the Empire controlled. The war would end with the High Chancellor in chains standing trial for genocide. The night before the operation, Sullivan walked through the hangar bays of the ESS Retribution. She watched the final preparations. Pilots checked their fighters. Marines loaded dropships. Engineers made last adjustments to weapon systems. She stopped to talk with a young pilot who was painting a name on her fighter's hull. Sullivan asked who Danny was. The pilot told her Danny was her older brother. He died in the detention camps. She was flying for him tomorrow. At exactly 0600 hours, the fleet jumped to faster than light speed. The journey to Thraxis would take 4 hours. During that time, Sullivan addressed every ship. She told them that in a few hours they would do something that would be remembered forever. They were going to look the most powerful empire in the galaxy directly in the eye and make them blink. The Caltharians killed 7 million humans, believing it would break humanity. Instead, it forged humanity into something the galaxy had never seen. A species that became dangerous when pushed too far. Today they would show the Caltharians the price of genocide. Today they would prove that humanity does not forgive and does not forget. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel directly above Thraxis Prime. For a brief moment there was complete silence as both sides processed what was happening. Then the battle began. Commodore Stone's first wave struck the orbital platforms with devastating precision. The Hellfire torpedoes and plasma beams hit defenses designed to withstand conventional weapons. The platforms had no answer to weapons that bypassed their shields entirely. Within minutes, hundreds of platforms exploded, lighting up the planet's atmosphere with brilliant flashes. The Caltharian home fleet responded quickly. Over 3,000 warships launched from positions around the gas giants and asteroid belts. They formed a massive wall of firepower and accelerated toward the human fleet. These were the finest vessels the Caltharian civilization had ever produced. Admiral Sullivan watched them approach. She ordered the second wave to engage. The Vengeance-class dreadnoughts were monuments to human determination and engineering. Each one could crack a moon. Against starship hulls, the effect was catastrophic. The space between the fleets became a storm of energy and exploding metal. Ships died on both sides. Fighters weaved through debris fields. Torpedoes streaked through the darkness. But the quantum-linked tactical systems gave human ships a decisive advantage. Caltharian vessels fought as individuals. Human ships moved as one coordinated organism. They covered each other's weaknesses and exploited every enemy mistake. Captain Grant coordinated fleet movements from his tactical station. He processed data from thousands of ships simultaneously. When he spotted weakness in the Caltharian left flank, he directed 12 cruiser groups to concentrate fire. The targeted formation collapsed. Sullivan ordered all dreadnoughts to push through the gap. The massive human warships plowed through the Caltharian defensive line. Their heavy armor absorbed hits that would have destroyed smaller vessels. Behind them came the carriers launching wave after wave of fighters. On Thrax's Prime High Chancellor Vexthor watched the battle from his command bunker deep beneath the planetary surface. The displays showed his forces being systematically destroyed. He could not understand how this was possible. His fleet outnumbered the humans. Fleet Admiral Caxtor studied the tactical data with professional detachment. He told Vexthor the truth. Human ships were better. Human weapons were better. Human coordination was superior. They needed to evacuate the High Chancellor immediately. Vexthor refused. He would not abandon the home world. He ordered every available ship and fighter and defense drone thrown at the humans. The Caltharians threw everything they had into the battle. For a moment, the sheer weight of numbers threatened to overwhelm the human advance. 3 dreadnoughts took critical damage. Dozens of cruisers were destroyed. The carrier ESS Vigilant was torn apart, taking 2,000 crew members with it. But humanity had anticipated these losses before the battle even started. Every casualty had been accepted. Every sacrifice acknowledged. The fleet pressed forward with mechanical determination driven by a purpose that transcended individual survival. Admiral Sullivan watched another ship go dark on her display. Captain Grant reported they were taking heavy losses. Sullivan acknowledged this but ordered them to keep pushing. They were almost through. The ESS Retribution broke through the last Caltharian defensive line and entered low orbit above Thrax's Prime. Around her, the surviving human ships formed a protective formation, holding off desperate counterattacks. Sullivan opened a channel to General Blake, commanding the landing forces. The door was open. Go get him. The dropships launched from their carriers in massive waves. 30,000 Marines in powered armor descended toward the Caltharian capital city. General Victor Blake stood in the lead dropship, watching the city grow larger through the viewport. The capital sprawled across a vast plateau. Gleaming spires and massive government buildings testified to 3,000 years of imperial power. Blake opened the assault channel to all units. He told them their objective was the High Chancellor's command bunker, located 500 meters below the Imperia. El Palace. They would fight through whatever resistance they encountered. They would breach that bunker. They would drag Vexthor out in chains. He reminded them to move fast and stay together and remember why they were there. The dropships hit atmosphere at speeds that made their hulls glow red hot. Caltharian anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, filling the sky with explosions and energy beams. Dozens of dropships were hit and tumbled from the sky, trailing fire and smoke. But most made it through. Their armored hulls were designed to absorb punishment. Blake's dropship slammed into the plaza in front of the Imperial Palace. The impact cratered the decorative stone. The rear ramp dropped and Marines surged out into a storm of defensive fire. The Caltharians had prepared for ground assault. Automated turrets ringed the palace. Elite guards who had never known defeat fought with desperate courage. But they faced human Marines who had trained for months for this exact moment. Marines fueled by rage and grief for 7 million dead. Sergeant Kyle Turner led his squad through the palace gardens using ancient trees and ornamental structures as cover. His armor's sensors highlighted enemy positions. His squad's weapons had been designed specifically to penetrate Caltharian armor. They made short work of the resistance. Turner kept his squad moving forward. They were not trying to hold ground. They were pushing relentlessly toward the objective. The battle for the plaza was brutal but quick. Human forces overwhelmed the defenders through sheer aggression and superior training. Within an hour, Marines had secured the palace entrance and begun descending into the bunker complex. Above them, the space battle continued. Admiral Sullivan's fleet had established control of orbit, but Caltharian reinforcements kept arriving from outer system positions. Captain Grant coordinated defensive formations while directing fire support for the ground forces. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, General Blake's assault force fought through level after level of the bunker. The Caltharians had turned every corridor into a killing zone. Every junction was a fortified position. Progress was measured in meters. Each meter cost blood. Lieutenant Amy Clark commanded a demolition team. She used shaped charges to blast through reinforced bulkheads. Behind her, Marines poured through the breaches, clearing rooms with practiced efficiency. The fighting was close quarters and savage. There was no room for hesitation or mercy. Blake reported to Sullivan that they were 3 levels from the command center. Resistance was heavy, but they were advancing. Sullivan told him they could only hold orbit for another 2 hours before fuel became critical. Whatever he was going to do, he needed to do it fast. Blake pushed his forces harder. They had come too far and sacrificed too much to fail now. The faces of 7 million dead haunted every step. The final barrier to the command center was a massive blast door designed to survive a nuclear strike. Clark's team spent precious minutes placing charges while Marines held back increasingly desperate counterattacks. When the charges blew, the explosion was contained by the corridor, but powerful enough to leave everyone's ears ringing. The command center beyond was vast. Holographic displays covered the walls. Control stations filled the space. At the center, surrounded by his personal guard, stood High Chancellor Vexthor. The reptilian leader wore full ceremonial armor and carried an ancient weapon. It was a symbol of authority dating back to the Empire's founding. Vexthor's translator rendered his words in flat, emotionless English. He told the humans they would die here. They might kill him, but they could not kill the Empire. The Caltharians would hunt humanity to extinction. Blake stepped forward. His armor was scarred and scorched from the fighting. He told Vexthor the Empire died the day it murdered 7 million prisoners of war. The Chancellor just had not accepted it yet. The personal guards attacked. The command center became chaotic melee. Blake's Marines fought with cold professional efficiency. The guards fought with the desperation of doomed men protecting their leader. The battle was one-sided. Human weapons and armor had been designed for this exact scenario. When the last guard fell, Blake stood before Vexthor. The Chancellor raised his weapon, but Blake was faster. His sidearm fired twice. The shot shattered Vexthor's weapon and struck his armor, spinning him to the ground. Blake told him he was coming with them. He would stand trial. He would answer for what he did. Marines bound Vexthor in restraints designed to hold him. Blake activated his communication link to Admiral Sullivan. Package secured. They were coming out. The extraction was a fighting retreat through the bunker complex. The structure was collapsing under deliberate demolition charges. Caltharians, learning their leader had been captured, threw everything they had at the retreating humans. But Blake's forces had accomplished their mission. They would not be denied now. The dropships launched from the plaza under heavy fire. Caltharian fighters pursued them into orbit. Human ships provided covering fire, and the landing forces made it back to the fleet with minimal additional losses. Blake personally delivered Vexthor to the ESS Retribution's brig, where the former Chancellor was secured in a cell designed specifically to hold him. Admiral Sullivan looked at the captured leader through reinforced, transparent walls. She told him his empire was finished. His fleet was scattered. His capital was in ruins. He had one chance to save his species from extinction. Order all forces to stand down. Submit to unconditional surrender. Vexthor's eyes burned with hatred. He refused. Sullivan's expression did not change. She told him then he would watch his civilization burn. She ordered her communications officer to broadcast images to every Caltharian system. Show them their leader in chains. Show them their capital burning. Show them what defiance cost. The images were transmitted across Caltharian space. The effect was immediate and devastating. Without their High Chancellor, and without their capital and without their home fleet, the Empire's unity shattered. Individual systems began broadcasting surrender terms. Fleet commanders abandoned their posts. In some cases, Caltharian forces turned on each other as factions fought for power. President Carter addressed humanity from Earth. Admiral Sullivan appeared beside her via hologram. Carter told them they had achieved what many thought impossible. They brought the Caltharian Empire to its knees. But this victory belonged to 7 million souls who died in detention camps. It belonged to every human who answered the call. It belonged to families who endured loss. It belonged to the builders and scientists who gave them the tools to fight. It belonged to future generations who would grow up in a galaxy where genocide carried a price so terrible none would dare attempt it again. The aftermath took years to resolve. Vexthor stood trial before an international tribunal, charged with genocide and crimes against sentient beings. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment on a remote penal colony, where he would spend his remaining days contemplating his crimes. The Caltharian Empire was dissolved. Its territories were granted independence or absorbed by neighboring powers. The species itself survived, but their dominance was finished forever. They would rebuild under watchful eyes, forbidden from possessing offensive military capabilities. Humanity emerged transformed. No longer newcomers struggling for recognition, they were now one of the galaxy's major powers. Feared and respected in equal measure. The memorial to 7 million dead was constructed on Earth. A massive structure visible from orbit, ensuring no human would ever forget what sparked their rise. Admiral Sullivan retired from military service and spent her remaining years teaching at the new Galactic Military Academy. Officers from dozens of species studied human tactics and doctrine. When asked about the war, she always said the same thing. Humanity did not win because they were stronger. They won because they refused to lose. Throughout human space, in every colony and station, people remembered. They remembered 7 million names. They remembered the day their species stood at the precipice and chose to fight back. The galaxy learned its lesson well. In the years that followed, no species dared test humanity's resolve. The memory of the Caltharian Empire's fall served as warning enough. Humanity had proven that even the mightiest empire could fall to a species united in purpose and driven by justice and willing to pay any price to protect their own.